I know you're a fan of Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey, and most people are. There's not really any criticism of him, is there? Or?
Well, I think like I learned so much from Joseph Campbell. I discovered him pretty young. I was like maybe 16 or 17 when I started reading him, and I was amazed by it. And of course, the thing that was nice about him was he was kind of a foray into Jung, and the theory of archetypes and things like that. So it was Well, Campbell's dense. It's a totally different thing to delve into Jung and Freud and all those things. And part of the issue, I know that, for example, the hero and the hero's journey, and people regard the hero as one of the central archetypes of the character. But I think Joseph Campbell illuminated certain insights into story that were incredibly helpful, but I don't think it's enough of a complete theory. And I plan on doing a video about this later to kind of get more specific. But just to give a teaser, I mean, ultimately, when we look at a hero is a very specific, it's a specific kind of character. That's why I tend to refer to things as a protagonist versus a hero. A hero is someone that exhibits certain virtues and values that are considered an ideal. And usually the story is about them testing their mettle. But the story can be so much more than just a kind of vulgar propaganda on exhibiting ideal virtues. And that's why the hero's journey, I think, is brilliant. It's fantastic. One thing that I liked about Joseph Campbell was that he was exploring the universality of certain story structures. But I don't think it's enough of a complete paradigm, because when we look at why we tell stories, it doesn't quite account for the initiation of the tribe or into the tribe. And that's what I think that's something that's very fascinating to me, is that my next video is about tribalism, actually. I'm in the process of talking about tribalism. I'd set up the relationship between religion and story in one video, and then I'm going to tie into tribalism. And I'm defining tribalism in a very specific way. We're going to go into the kind of biological imperatives that inform tribalism. But basically, and this is a little teaser, but I define groups. There are different groups of people that define themselves according to what their objectives are. So for example, a community is a group of people with a common interest. A movement is a group of people with a common cause. A tribe is a group of people with a common enemy. So, and they have very, very different ways of functioning. If you have an enemy, that usually creates a kind of loyalty becomes very important. It's a virtue within a tribe. Within a community of broad open interests, you don't necessarily need loyalty in order to function. You can just have voluntary interactions. With tribalism, because it defines itself primarily by its enemy, and it presents it as a threat, and therefore hierarchy becomes very important. And a lot of stories throughout most of the history of humanity were designed to help create those hierarchies. So because most tribes were surviving in the context of a lot of constant threat, perpetual threat, which means they had to live in very rigid communities or rigid groups of people. So the narratives and the stories they would tell were always about hero structures. They were designed to help people incorporate these values and these virtues as vital to survival. And so because of that, this hero's journey was ultimately a kind of propaganda, because it was designed to drive people's behavior and value system to be subject and loyal to the tribe. And that's why I think stories that are more engaged in moral ambiguity have much more interesting things to tell, because they're not just interested in imposing or propagating specific narrow values that emphasize loyalty, but instead we'll actually explore the nature of the human condition. And that's what I think is a much more interesting thing. If we can understand the way that story is a kind of exploration of values rather than just a propagation of values, then I think we actually have a more meaningful discourse in understanding story and humanity.